The hall was the quietest place Jin had ever been. It wasn't the quiet of a library or a forest. This was a deep humming silence filled by machines that breathed cool recycled air. Bright white light came from everywhere and nowhere, reflecting off the polished floors and the towering ceilings. Jin sat at a smooth metal console, one among hundreds. All around him were the other cadets. There were beings with skin of shimmering blue and others with multiple delicate arms. There was Kai from a planet Jin could not pronounce, who had long fingers and a confident, almost smug look on his face. Next to Jin sat Mina, another human from Earth. She was tapping her fingers nervously on her console. They were all here for the final test, the Armory exam. This was the test that decided if you were good enough to serve in the Galactic Federation fleet. It was the most important day of their lives. At the front of the vast room, a man stood on a raised platform. This was Instructor Park. He was a human, but he had served in the fleet for longer than Jin had been alive. His face was stern, with lines that looked like they were carved from stone. He did not smile. His eyes moved over the crowd of cadets, and the room became even quieter. "The final practical exam is simple," Instructor Park said. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the hall. "Your console will generate a random, non-standard problem, a challenge you might face in the field. Your task is to improvise a solution. You must create this solution using only the base materials provided by the simulation. Remember this: success is measured by effectiveness, not complexity. A simple solution that works is better than a complicated one that fails." Jin took a slow breath. This was it. He placed his hands on the cool surface of his console. He watched as the screen in front of him lit up. The words appeared in clear, standard script. "Improvise a weapon." Jin blinked. He read it again. "Improvise a weapon." That was all. No other instructions. No specific target. No type of enemy. Just those 3 words. He looked to his left. He could see Mina's screen from the corner of his eye. Her prompt said, "Create a barrier against kinetic projectiles." She was already working, her fingers moving quickly. She was pulling up schematics for a force field, her brow furrowed in concentration. He glanced to his right. The alien cadet Kai had a prompt that read, "Neutralize a phased energy drone." A small, proud smile was on Kai's face. His long fingers were already designing a complex device, a glowing orb of energy that pulsed on his screen. Jin could hear the soft tapping and humming from the consoles all around him. Everyone was building something. Everyone was using the simulation's tools to create beams and shields and pulses of energy. Jin looked back at his own screen. Improvise a weapon. He opened the menu for the base materials. The list was always the same, a collection of simple, common items that a soldier might have on a basic mission. There was a standard-issue datapad, a single low-yield power cell, a length of strong polymer cord, a wrapper from a nutrient bar, and a single sheet of plasteel-reinforced flimsy. And flimsy was what the Galactic Federation used for all its important documents. It was like paper, but stronger and slightly flexible. You could write on it, and it was very hard to tear. But it was still just flimsy. It wasn't a weapon. Everyone else was ignoring the flimsy. They were focused on the power cell and the datapad, trying to build something technological. Kai was using the power cell to fuel his ionic pulse emitter. Mina was using the datapad's projector to help shape her force field. Jin just stared at the list. A weapon? What is a weapon? His first thought was to try and build a shock prod. He could use the power cell and the cord, but he didn't have any metal for the contact points. The flimsy wouldn't conduct electricity well. It was a dead end. He thought about making a sling with the cord and the nutrient bar as a weight. But that seemed weak. It wouldn't do much damage. He leaned back in his chair. He needed to think differently. The instruction was to improvise. To use what you have. He looked at the virtual sheet of flimsy on his screen. It was just sitting there, a blank white rectangle. He remembered something from his childhood on Earth. He remembered his grandfather in a small workshop, sharpening an old kitchen knife on the bottom of a ceramic plate. His grandfather had said, "You don't always need a fancy tool, Jin. You just need to know how to use what's in front of you." Jin looked at the flimsy. What was it made of? Plasteel reinforced. That meant it had tiny microscopic strands of a hard ceramic plastic alloy woven through it. It wasn't just fiber. It had a hard structure, An idea, strange and quiet, began to form in his mind. It was a crazy idea. Everyone would laugh. But it was an idea. He selected the flimsy sheet. Then he went to the tools menu. Everyone had access to the same tools. There were laser welders, molecular bonders, and a precision laser scalpel. The scalpel was meant for delicate repair work on circuitry. Jin selected the laser scalpel. He didn't point it at the power cell or the data pad. He pointed the virtual beam at the edge of the flimsy sheet. "Jin, what are you doing?" It was Mina. She had paused her work and was looking at his screen. Her eyes were wide with confusion. "I'm working on my weapon," Jin said, his voice low. "With the flimsy? Jin, the exam is half over. You need to build something real. Look at what Kai is doing." Jin didn't look. He focused on his screen. He used the laser scalpel not to cut the flimsy, but to heat a very thin line along one edge. He then carefully folded the flimsy along that heated line, creating a sharp, hard crease. He did it again and again, folding the sheet back and forth on itself in a tight zigzag pattern. He wasn't making origami. He was work-hardening the material. With each fold, he was aligning the tiny plasteel filaments, packing them closer together, making that specific edge of the flimsy stiffer and stronger. He could feel Kai's eyes on him. He heard a soft chittering sound. It was the sound Kai's species made when they were amused. "The human is making art," Kai said, not even bothering to whisper to the cadet next to him. "He has given up. He is decorating his surrender." A few other cadets nearby glanced over and snickered. Jin ignored them. His entire world had shrunk to the sheet of flimsy on his screen. He had turned the once flat sheet into a stiff, narrow-pointed shard. It was about the length of his hand. It was thick in the middle where it had been folded, and it came to a sharp point at one end, but it was still dull. The edge was just folded flimsy. It wouldn't cut anything. He needed to sharpen it. He looked at the list of materials again. The nutrient bar wrapper was a thin, metallic foil. It was too soft. The datapad had a hard screen, but it was too big. He needed something abrasive, something hard. His eyes fell on the console itself. The housing was made of a hard, durable plasteel alloy, the same kind of material that was woven into the flimsy, but in a much denser, solid form. This was a simulation, but it was a very good one. It simulated real-world physics. Jin picked up his sharpened flimsy shard in the simulation. Then he began to carefully scrape its long edge against the corner of his own console. He used a gentle, steady grinding motion. Back and forth. Back and forth. The laser scalpel had been a precise tool. This was a primitive one. He was using the world itself to finish his weapon. Small virtual particles of flimsy dust fell away. He was slowly wearing down the folded edge, not making it smooth, but making it thin. He was creating a microscopic, jagged, serrated edge. It would never be as sharp as a metal knife, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to be sharp enough to pierce. Mina was watching him, her face pale with second-hand anxiety. "Jin, stop this. You're wasting time. There are only 10 minutes left. Build a simple taser with the power cell and the cord. Anything is better than scraping paper on a desk." Jin didn't stop. Back and forth. Back and forth. He could feel the eyes of the other cadets on him. He could feel their judgment. He heard their whispers. The human has cracked under the pressure. He's lost his mind. Even Instructor Park was watching. The instructor had been walking slowly between the rows of consoles, observing the cadets' work. He had praised Kai's elegant ion emitter. He had nodded at Mina's robust barrier design. Now he stood a few meters behind Jin, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was impossible to read. He just watched as Jin scraped the folded flimsy against the console. Jin didn't look back. He trusted the idea. He focused on the feeling in his hands. He was making a thing that could cut, a thing that could stab. It was the most basic weapon in history, a sharp piece of hard material. With 1 minute left on the clock, Jin stopped. He held the flimsy shard up in the simulation. It was no longer a document. It was a rigid, pale-pointed spike. One long edge was now a dull gray from the grinding, and it looked dangerously thin. The timer hit 0. A chime sounded through the hall. "All cadets cease work," Instructor Park's voice boomed. "The construction phase is over. The demonstration phase will now begin." Jin placed his improvised weapon on the console. It was just a small white shard. Next to the glowing energy weapons and shimmering force fields on the other screens, it looked pathetic. It looked like nothing. He took a deep breath. He had done it. Now he had to prove it worked. The chime echoed through the hall, cutting off the low hum of activity. All around Jin, the glowing screens of the consoles froze. The complex designs of energy weapons and force fields hung in the air, bright and impressive. Jin's own screen showed only the simple, pale shard of folded flimsy. It looked small and lonely next to the other projects. Instructor Park walked to the center of the platform at the front of the room. His boots made soft clicks on the polished floor. "The demonstration phase begins now," he said. "You will present your solutions in order. You will explain your reasoning. Then you will test your creation against a standard simulation target." A wave of nervous energy passed through the cadets. Jin could feel it. He kept his eyes on Instructor Park, trying to ignore the looks from the cadets around him. He could see Mina from the corner of his eye. She was looking at her own solid barrier design, then glancing at his flimsy shard with a worried frown. The first cadet to present was a tall being with 4 arms. Their prompt had been to disable a security sensor. They had built a small device that emitted a blanket electromagnetic pulse. On the screen, a floating eye-shaped sensor drifted into view. The cadet activated their device. The sensor flickered and went dark, falling to the virtual ground with a dull thud. Instructor Park gave a short, sharp nod. Effective, next. One by one, the cadets presented their work. There were sonic projectors that shattered glass, adhesive foams that trapped robotic limbs, and focused light beams that melted through locks. Each solution was technological. Each one used the power cell or the data pad in a clever way. Each one got a nod from Instructor Park. Then it was Kai's turn. Kai stood up straight, his iridescent skin catching the light. He gestured to his console where the beautiful complex design of his ionic pulse emitter glowed. "My prompt was to neutralize a phased energy drone," Kai said, his voice loud and clear. "A phased drone is mostly non-corporeal. It is immune to physical attacks. It required a solution that could disrupt its energy matrix directly." He activated the simulation. A drone appeared on the large screen at the front of the hall. It was a shimmering, translucent thing hovering silently. It looked like a ghost. "My ionic pulse emitter uses the power cell to build a charge," Kai explained. "It then releases that charge in a focused wave. This wave will not harm physical matter, but it is devastating to unstable energy forms." He pressed a final button. The emitter on his screen glowed brightly. A wave of visible distortion like heat haze shot out and struck the drone. The drone flickered wildly, its form breaking apart into sparkling motes of light before vanishing completely. A murmur of appreciation went through the hall. It was a perfect, elegant solution. Instructor Park looked at Kai. A high-level response to a high-level problem. "Well executed, Cadet Kai." Kai sat down, a look of pure satisfaction on his face. He glanced over at Jin, his eyes briefly resting on the simple, flimsy shard. He did not sneer. He did not need to. The difference between his creation and Jin's was so vast that a sneer would have been unnecessary. His look was simply one of pity. Next was Mina. She stood up, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "My prompt was to create a barrier against kinetic projectiles," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I used the datapad's projector and the power cell to create a layered force dissipation field. It doesn't try to be a solid wall. Instead, it catches the projectile and spreads its energy out over a wide area, robbing it of its force." On the main screen, a large gun turret appeared. It began to fire solid, high-velocity slugs. Mina activated her barrier. A shimmering hexagonal field appeared in front of the turret. The slugs hit it, and instead of ricocheting, they just stopped. They hung in the air for a second, their energy spent before dropping harmlessly to the ground. The barrier held. Instructor Park nodded again. "A practical and efficient defense. Good work, Cadet Mina." Mina sat down, letting out a slow breath of relief. She gave Jin a quick, encouraging smile, but the worry in her eyes was still there. Then it was Jin's turn. The hall was quiet. All the technological, impressive solutions had been shown. Now everyone's attention turned to the human who had scraped paper for an hour. Jin stood up. He felt every pair of eyes on him. He walked to the front of his console. The flimsy shard was just sitting there. "Cadet Jin," Instructor Park said. His voice was neutral. "Demonstrate your improvised weapon." Jin picked up the flimsy shard from the console. In the simulation, his avatar held it. On the main screen, everyone could see it clearly. It was a stark, white, pointed object. It looked like a child's craft project. My prompt was, "Improvise a weapon," Jin began. His voice was quieter than Kai's had been, but it was steady. The instructions did not specify a target or a technology level, so I focused on the materials I was given. He listed them: a data pad, a power cell, a cord, a wrapper, a sheet of flimsy. I determined that the most effective weapon I could build with these items was not an energy weapon. I did not have the parts for a reliable circuit. It was not a projectile weapon. I had no propellant. So I looked at the flimsy. A soft snicker came from somewhere in the room. Instructor Park's eyes scanned the crowd and the snickering stopped instantly. "Flimsy is plasteel reinforced," Jin continued. "That means it has a hard structure inside it. It is fragile when bent the wrong way, but it can be very strong if you shape it correctly. I used the laser scalpel to heat and fold it. I folded it many times to make it stiff and hard. This is called work hardening." He held up the shard. "This created a strong, pointed shape, but it was not sharp. To make it sharp, I needed an abrasive surface. I used the corner of this console, which is made of a harder plasteel alloy. I ground the edge of the flimsy against it until it was thin." He finished. There was nothing else to say. Instructor Park watched him for a long moment. "And what is the target for this weapon?" "The test protocol says to use the standard simulation target for unspecified weapons," Jin said. "That is the ballistic gel dummy." A life-sized figure made of clear synthetic gel appeared on the main screen. It was used to test the penetration of bullets and blades. "Proceed," Instructor Park said. Jin's avatar on the screen held the flimsy shard. Jin himself made a simple, practiced throwing motion with his hand. On the screen, his avatar did the same. The flimsy shard flew through the air. It did not glow. It did not make a sound. It was utterly silent. It spun just once, a pale blur, and then it struck the gel dummy. There was a soft, wet thock sound from the speakers. The shard had hit the dummy in the throat. It was not a shallow cut. The pointed tip and the sharpened edge had sunk deep into the synthetic flesh. It was embedded firmly. A deep gouge showed in the clear gel around the wound. The hall was completely, utterly silent. It was a silence louder than any explosion or applause. The cadets stared at the screen. They saw the complex, glowing designs of their own weapons. Then they looked at the simple shard of paper stuck in the dummy's throat. The result was the same. The dummy was neutralized. Kai was the first to break the silence. He stood up, his chair scraping back. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice sharp. "That is not a weapon." "It's a piece of trash. It has no power source, no targeting system. You can't reload it. It's primitive." Other cadets began to murmur in agreement. The shock was wearing off, replaced by disbelief and a sense of unfairness. "He just threw a piece of paper. My design took real engineering. This shouldn't count." Instructor Park held up a hand. The murmuring stopped. He looked at Kai, then at the other cadets, and finally his gaze landed on Jin. "Cadet Kai is correct," Park said. His words sent a wave of disappointment through Jin, but Jin stood his ground. Park continued. "It is primitive. It has no power source. It cannot be reused." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. But the exam was not to build a Federation standard sidearm. The exam was to improvise a weapon, a single functional weapon from the materials given. He walked over to the main screen and pointed at the gel dummy, at the flimsy shard still buried in its throat. "Did it work?" Instructor Park asked the room. No one answered. "I asked a question," he said, his voice hardening. "Did Cadet Jin's creation fulfill the function of a weapon? Did it successfully damage the target?" A few cadets nodded reluctantly. Mina, after a moment, gave a small, definite nod. "Yes," Instructor Park said. "It did. It is a weapon. An improvised one. It is perhaps the most pure improvisation I have seen today." He turned to face Jin fully. "Now, Cadet Jin, explain your reasoning." "Not the how. We saw the how. Explain the why. Why did you choose to make this sharpened piece of paper when you could have tried to build a circuit? A taser, anything else?" Jin looked at the flimsy shard on the screen. He looked at the stunned faces of the other cadets. He looked at Instructor Park's intense, waiting face. He knew his answer would decide everything. The silence in the hall was heavy. All eyes were on Jin. He could feel the weight of their stares. He saw Kai's angry face. He saw Mina's hopeful one. He saw Instructor Park's unreadable expression. The question hung in the air. Why? Jin took a slow breath. He needed to find the right words. Simple words. You asked us to improvise, Jin began, his voice quiet but clear in the silent room. To use what we had, not what we wished we had. He looked at the list of materials still displayed on his console. A data pad, a power cell, a cord, a wrapper, a sheet of flimsy. He pointed to them one by one. With these things I could not build a good energy weapon. I do not have the knowledge to make a safe and strong circuit from a data pad and a power cell in 1 hour. It might work. It might not. It might explode. He then pointed to the flimsy shard on the screen, still stuck in the dummy's throat. But I know how to make a sharp point. I know that if you fold something enough times it gets hard. I know that if you rub a soft rock on a hard rock, the soft rock gets sharp. These are old ideas. Simple ideas. But they are reliable ideas. Kai made a sound of disgust. So you chose to be a caveman because it was easy? Jin looked at Kai. No. I chose it because it was the most reliable solution with the materials given. Your weapon is beautiful. It is smart. But it needs power. What if the power cell was dead? What if the enemy has a device that stops all energy weapons? Your beautiful emitter becomes a useless piece of metal and plastic. He turned back to Instructor Park. My weapon does not need power. It does not give off a signal. It cannot be detected. It is just a thing. A hard, sharp thing. An enemy will not be looking for it. They will be looking for the things you all built. The energy signatures. The electronic signals. They would never see this coming. He paused, thinking of his grandfather again. A weapon is not about the light show. It is about the result. The result is that the target is neutralized. This, he said, pointing at the screen, neutralizes the target. Instructor Park did not speak for a long time. He looked from Jin's face to the flimsy shard and back again. The other cadets fidgeted nervously. They were waiting for his final judgment. Was it brilliant or was it a stupid trick? Finally, Instructor Park walked away from Jin. He walked to the center of the platform and addressed the entire hall. The purpose of this exam is not to see if you can follow a blueprint, he said. It is to see if you can think. When you are in the field, things will go wrong. Your equipment will fail. You will be captured. You will have nothing. He began to walk slowly between the rows of consoles, his hands behind his back. The Federation teaches you to build the best technology in the galaxy. And that is good. But it can also make your minds lazy. It can make you think that only a technological solution is a real solution. He stopped next to Kai's console. He looked at the beautiful ion emitter. Cadet Kai, your weapon is excellent. For that specific drone, it is the perfect tool. You get a high mark. He then tapped the console. But what if you were in a room that blocked all energy emissions? What if you had no power cell? What would you do? Kai opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His confident look was gone. He had no answer. Instructor Park moved on. He stopped next to Mina. Cadet Mina, your barrier is strong and well designed. You also get a high mark. But what if your enemy does not use projectiles? What if they use gas? Or what if they simply walk through your barrier because they are not moving fast? Would your design help you then? Mina looked down at her console, thinking hard. Instructor Park continued his walk. You have all been thinking inside a box. A very advanced, very comfortable box. But it is still a box. He returned to the front of the room and stood next to Jin. Cadet. Jin was the only one who looked at the box itself and wondered if he could make a weapon out of it. He turned to the large screen and zoomed in on the gel dummy. The flimsy shard looked small and plain. This is not just a piece of paper, Instructor Park said. This is a lesson. The most dangerous enemy is not the one with the bigger gun. It is the one who uses the world in a way you do not expect. It is the one who turns your own rules against you. It is the one who sees a simple, harmless thing and understands its hidden potential for harm. He looked at Jin. Cadet Jin, you have passed this exam. Not only have you passed it, you have shown a level of practical, foundational thinking that this academy needs more of. Your weapon is the most effective one here because it redefines what a weapon can be. A wave of stunned silence, then soft whispers moved through the hall. Jin felt a wave of relief so strong his knees felt weak. He had done it. Instructor Park was not finished. Do not misunderstand me. I am not saying you should throw away your plasma rifles. Technology is our strength. But imagination, that is our secret weapon. And Cadet Jin has just demonstrated that human imagination is a terrifying and powerful thing. He dismissed the class. The cadets began to stand up, their chairs scraping against the floor. The noise level rose as everyone started talking at once. Many cadets looked at Jin with new respect. Others still looked confused or even angry. Kai walked past Jin's console without looking at him. His shoulders were stiff. Mina came over, a big smile on her face. "Jin, that was amazing. I was so worried for you." "But you were right." "You were completely right." Jin just nodded, feeling tired. The stress of the last hour was finally catching up to him. Instructor Park walked over to him. The other cadets gave them space. "Walk with me, cadet," Park said. Jin fell into step beside him as they left the great hall and entered a quieter corridor. "Where did you learn that?" Instructor Park asked. His tone was no longer that of an instructor to a cadet, but more like one soldier to another. "My grandfather," Jin said. "On Earth, he was a craftsman. He fixed things. He always said that you should know how to use simple tools. He said that sometimes the best tool is the one you make yourself from what is around you." Instructor Park nodded slowly. "Your grandfather was a wise man. That kind of wisdom is often forgotten out here among the stars. We rely on our machines too much." They walked in silence for a moment. "What you did in there," Park said. "It is more than just a good exam answer. It is a philosophy, a way of thinking that could save lives. My life was saved once on a mission by a piece of broken pipe, not by a blaster." He stopped and looked at Jin. "I want you to think about something. I want you to consider joining a special project group I am starting. It is for cadets who think differently. We will not be building the newest plasma cannon. We will be studying how to turn nothing into something, how to be dangerous when you have nothing." Jin was surprised. This was more than he had ever expected. I would be honored, sir." "Good," Instructor Park said. "Report to Hangar 7 tomorrow at 0800. Do not bring your standard gear. Bring only your mind." He turned and walked away, leaving Jin alone in the corridor. Jin stood there for a long time thinking. He thought about the exam. He thought about the sharpened flimsy. He thought about his grandfather's workshop. He had come to the academy to learn about advanced technology. But today he had learned that the most advanced thing he possessed was not in his toolkit. It was in his mind. He started walking back to his quarters. He knew things would be different now. Some people would see him as a genius. Others would see him as a cheat. But he didn't care. He had proven something to himself. He belonged here. And maybe, just maybe, the future of the Federation did not lie in building better guns, but in remembering how to sharpen a piece of paper. The next morning, Jin walked towards Hangar 7. The rest of the academy was all sleek metal and glowing lights. But Hangar 7 was different. It was an old part of the station, built from heavy, gray concrete. The door was a large sliding slab that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. It groaned loudly as it moved for him. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dust and old metal. The hangar was not filled with shiny starships. Instead, it was like a giant storage room or a junkyard. There were piles of broken machinery, stacks of old cargo containers, and bins filled with scrap parts. The light came from a few weak lamps hanging from the high ceiling. Instructor Park stood in the middle of the chaos. He was wearing simple work clothes, not his formal instructor's uniform. With him were two other cadets. Jin recognized one of them. It was Mina. She gave him a small, nervous smile. The other was a cadet he didn't know, a young man with a serious face and short black hair. "Jin, good, you're here," Instructor Park said. "This is Mina and this is Lee." Lee gave a short, sharp nod. He did not smile. "Welcome to the Applied Pragmatics Group," Park said, looking at the three of them. "You are here because you showed something the others didn't. Mina, you showed efficient use of limited energy. Lee, in your engineering exam, you used the casing of a broken reactor to build a shelter. And Jin, you showed us all that the instructions can be the weapon." He gestured to the piles of junk around them. "This is your new classroom. Out there," he pointed towards the main academy, "they teach you how to use the best tools in the galaxy. In here, we will learn how to win a fight when you have no tools at all." He walked over to a large bin and pulled out a random object. It was a broken hydraulic piston from a cargo loader. "What is this?" Park asked. "It's broken, sir," Lee said immediately. "Is it?" Park asked. "It can't lift anything. So it's useless?" He looked at Jin. Jin thought for a moment. It's heavy. It's made of solid metal. The end is blunt. You could use it as a club. Park nodded. Good, a club. He threw it back into the bin with a loud clang. He picked up a length of flexible plastic tubing. And this? Mina frowned. It's just a tube. Maybe you could siphon something? Maybe, Park said. Or maybe you could tie a knot in the middle, soak it in fuel, and light it on fire to make a torch. Or you could fill it with sand and use it as a flexible blackjack. Or you could cut it into rings and use them as bindings. He dropped the tube. Your first lesson is this: nothing is just what it is. Everything has potential. Your job is to see it. For the next few hours, Instructor Park led them through the piles of junk. He would point at something and ask, "How can this hurt someone? How can it help you? How can it help you escape?" They looked at broken data pads, empty fuel canisters, torn insulation blankets, and shattered viewports. It was hard work. Lee was good at seeing how things could be taken apart. Mina was good at thinking about energy and forces. But Jin saw things differently. He saw shapes and edges and weights. He saw how a twisted piece of metal frame could be a hook. He saw how a shard of broken glass could be hidden in a seam of clothing. He saw how the spring from a broken chair could be turned into a trap. They were all learning, but Jin's mind worked in this place. This was his language. After a while, Instructor Park gathered them again. Now your first test, you will work in pairs. Mina and Lee, you are together. Jin, you are with me. He led Jin to a different part of the hangar. There was a simple table. On the table were two items. One was a standard issue nutrient bar. The other was the wrapper from a nutrient bar, crumpled up. The scenario, Park said. You have been captured. Your captors are not stupid. They have taken all your gear, your weapons, your tools. They have searched you, but they are arrogant. They have given you this nutrient bar to eat. They have left you alone in a locked room. All you have is the bar and the wrapper when you are done. How do you escape? Jin looked at the bar and the wrapper. It was an even harder problem than the flimsy. The flimsy was at least strong. This was food and foil. He picked up the nutrient bar. It was dense and hard. He picked up the wrapper. It was a thin metallic foil, coated on the inside with a thin layer of plastic. Can I eat the bar? Jin asked. Yes, Park said. You need your strength. Jin unwrapped the bar and ate it. It tasted like chalk and protein. He chewed slowly, looking at the empty wrapper in his hand. He smoothed it out on the table. It was a rectangle of thin, flexible metal. He thought about the room. A locked room. What kind of lock? Probably electronic? Maybe a simple code panel, or a magnetic lock. He looked at the foil. It was metal. It could conduct electricity, but he had no power source. He could try to pick a mechanical lock with a stiff piece of foil, but most doors here didn't have those. Then he remembered something from an old Earth movie, something about using foil to short-circuit a door. He looked at Instructor Park. The door lock. Is it a card swipe reader? The kind with a thin slot? A slow smile spread across Park's face. He was impressed Jin had guessed it. Yes, it is. Jin held up the foil wrapper. If I fold this carefully, I can make a thin, stiff strip. If I push that strip into the card reader, it might slip past the sensors and cause a short circuit. Sometimes that makes the door unlock. It's a fault in the system. Park nodded. It is a known fault in older models. A security risk we never bother to fix because no one is ever without their proper key card. He looked at the simple foil in Jin's hand. You would use your lunch to break out of jail. It's not lunch, Jin said, repeating Park's own lesson. It's a key. Instructor Park clapped him on the shoulder. It was a hard, heavy clap. Exactly. Now go see how Mina and Lee are doing with their problem. Jin walked over to the other side of the hangar. Mina and Lee were staring at a different table. On their table was a broken headset and a small dead power cell. Their scenario was to create a distraction. They were trying to see if they could get a single spark from the dead cell by rubbing wires together. They were frustrated. Jin looked at the headset. He picked it up. One of the small speakers was cracked. Can I have this? He asked them. Lee shrugged. It's useless. Jin took the headset over to a workbench with a heavy metal vise. He carefully broke the ceramic magnet out of the broken speaker. It was a small, powerful disc. He then found a long, thin screw from a pile of scraps. He rubbed the screw against the magnet over and over in one direction. He was magnetizing the screw. He walked back to Mina and Lee. He held the magnetized screw over the table. He let it go. It swung freely like a compass needle pointing towards the large metal hangar door. You can use the magnet to find direction, Jin said. Or, he picked up a handful of small metal filings from the floor. You can scatter these filings and use the magnet to create a pattern on the floor. A message, or an arrow, to guide someone to you. Mina and Lee stared, first at the swinging screw, then at Jin. They had been trying to create a flash of light. They hadn't thought about creating a silent sign. Instructor Park, who had been watching from a distance, walked over. Lesson 2, he said to Mina and Lee. Do not try to solve the problem you imagine. Solve the problem you have. You needed a distraction. A spark is one kind of distraction. A mysterious arrow on the floor is another. It might be better. It is certainly quieter. He looked at all three of them. Jin is ahead of you. Do not be jealous. Learn from him. His mind is not cluttered with how things are supposed to work. He only sees how they can work. The session ended soon after. As they were leaving, Mina caught up to Jin. How do you do that? She asked, her voice full of genuine curiosity, not anger. How do you look at a piece of trash and see all those possibilities? Jin thought about it. I don't see what it is, he said. I see what it can become. My grandfather taught me that. A stick is not just a stick. It can be a lever, a weapon, a measuring tool, a signpost. It depends on what you need. They walked out of the old hangar and back into the bright, clean halls of the main academy. It felt like stepping from one world into another. Jin knew which world he preferred. In the bright halls, he was just another cadet. In the dusty hangar, he was something more. He was a person who could see the hidden weapons in everyday things. And he was just getting started. Weeks passed. Jin, Mina, and Lee spent every spare moment in Hangar 7. The piles of junk became their textbooks. They learned to start fires with a battery and steel wool. They learned to make glue from tree sap and charcoal. They learned to turn a simple meal packet into a waterproof bag. They were no longer just cadets. They were becoming something else. They were learning the old ways, the simple ways, the ways that worked when technology failed. One day, Instructor Park did not meet them in the hangar. Instead, they got a message on their data pads. It was a set of coordinates deep in the forest on the Academy's training moon. The message was simple. Field test, survive, evade, reach the extraction point. You have no gear. You have 48 hours. They were taken to the moon in a silent shuttle. The door opened and they were pushed out into a cold, damp forest. The shuttle flew away without a word. They stood in the mud, wearing only their standard thin uniforms. They had nothing. No food, no water, no tools. For a moment, panic set in. The forest was huge and dark. Strange animal calls echoed in the distance. What do we do? Mina asked, her voice shaking. Lee looked around, his engineer's mind assessing. We need shelter. And water. Jin was already moving. He walked to a nearby tree and broke off a low-hanging branch that was as long as his arm. It was straight and strong. This is our first tool, he said. He used a sharp rock to scrape one end of the branch into a rough point. It was not as good as his flimsy shard, but it was something. A spear. We need to find water, Jin said. And we need to move away from this landing spot. It's the first place they will look for us. They started walking. Jin led the way, his spear held ready. Lee looked for signs of flowing water. Mina listened for any unusual sounds that might mean danger. After an hour of walking, they found a small, clear stream. They drank deeply, using their hands as cups. The water was cold and good. Okay, we have water, Lee said. Now we need shelter before it gets dark. And food. Jin looked at the trees. He saw a type of vine he recognized from their lessons. It was strong and flexible. He cut long pieces of it with his sharp rock. He found 2 young trees growing close together. He wove the vines between them, creating a simple net. Then he gathered large leaves and ferns and layered them over the vine net. In 20 minutes, he had made a small, crude lean-to shelter. It would keep the rain off. Mina and Lee watched, amazed. They had read about this, but seeing Jin do it so quickly was different. Food, Jin said. He looked at the stream. There might be fish. He took his spear and waded into the cold water. He stood perfectly still, watching. Mina and Lee waited on the bank, not daring to speak. A small silvery fish swam near his legs. Jin's arm moved fast. He stabbed down with the spear. He missed. The fish darted away. He tried again. And again. On his 5th try, he pulled the spear up. A wriggling fish was impaled on the sharpened end. He had done it. They had food. That night, they made a small fire. Jin showed them how to rub two specific types of wood together to create heat and then embers. It was hard work and his arms ached, but a small curl of smoke appeared and then a tiny flame. They fed the flame with dry leaves and twigs. They cooked the fish over the fire. It was not much, but it was enough. They huddled in the shelter, listening to the sounds of the forest. They were cold, hungry, and scared, but they were alive. They were using the lessons from the hangar. The next day, they began to move towards the extraction point. The coordinates were on their data pads, but the data pads had no power. They had to use the sun and the magnetized screw trick Jin had shown them to find their direction. They walked for hours. The forest was thick and difficult. They were tired and hungry again, then they heard it. The low hum of a drone. It was a seeker drone, part of the test. It was looking for them. "Get down," Lee whispered. They hid behind a large fallen tree. The drone hovered above them, its red sensor light scanning the area. It was designed to find body heat and movement. "It's going to see us," Mina said, her voice tight with fear. Jin looked around frantically. He saw a patch of thick, wet mud near the stream. Without a word, he scooped up handfuls of the cold, wet mud and smeared it all over his face and uniform. He motioned for the others to do the same. They covered themselves in mud. The mud was cold and it masked their body heat. They pressed themselves against the wet ground under the log. The drone sensor passed over them. It hesitated for a moment, then moved on. The hum faded away. They stayed still for a long time after the drone was gone. "That was too close," Lee breathed. Jin nodded. "They are testing everything. Our survival. Our evasion. They won't make it easy." They continued their journey, now covered in mud and moving more carefully. As they got closer to the extraction point, the forest began to change. The trees became thinner. They were coming to the edge of a large, open field. In the middle of the field was a small landing pad. That was the extraction point, but between them and the landing pad was the final challenge. Two training androids stood guard. They were not killing machines, but they were programmed to capture. They had stun nets and energy lassos. They patrolled the edge of the field, their metal feet crunching on the grass. "We can't fight them," Lee said. "They are too strong. We have no weapons that can hurt metal." "We don't need to hurt them," Jin said, his eyes scanning the field. "We just need to get past them." He looked at the trees around them. He looked at the androids. He looked at the landing pad. A plan began to form in his mind. It was a crazy plan, but it was the only one they had. He explained it quickly to Mina and Lee. Their eyes went wide, but they nodded. They had to try. Mina and Lee moved to one side of the field, hiding behind trees. Jin moved to the other side. On Jin's signal, Mina and Lee started making noise. They threw rocks and shouted. The two androids turned their heads. Their sensors locked onto the noise. They began to walk towards Mina and Lee. This was Jin's chance. While the androids were distracted, he had to run across the open field to the landing pad. He took a deep breath and ran. His legs were tired, but he pushed himself. The grass was wet under his feet. The landing pad was getting closer, but one of the androids turned its head. It saw him. It raised its arm. A glowing energy lasso shot out towards Jin. Jin dove to the ground. The lasso missed him by inches. He rolled and kept running. The android was now coming for him. The other one was still going towards Mina and Lee. Jin was almost at the landing pad. He could see the shuttle waiting. But the android was fast. It was gaining on him. He reached the edge of the landing pad. He was there. But the android was right behind him. It reached for him with a metal hand. Suddenly there was a loud thwack sound. The android stopped. It wobbled. Then it fell over onto the grass. Its legs were tangled in a mess of strong vines. Lee had built a snare trap and the android had run right into it. The second android, confused by its partner falling, turned around. This gave Mina the opening she needed. She threw a large rock she had been hiding. The rock hit a small sensitive sensor on the android's back. It sparked and shut down, falling to the ground. There was silence. The only sound was Jin's heavy breathing. Then the door of the shuttle on the landing pad slid open. Instructor Park stood there. He was not smiling, but there was a look of deep respect in his eyes. He looked at the two disabled androids. He looked at the three muddy, exhausted cadets. "You used the forest itself as a weapon," Park said. "You used noise as a distraction. You used mud as camouflage. You used vines as a trap. You used a rock as a precision tool. He stepped out of the shuttle. You did not have a single piece of technology, but you had everything you needed. He looked at Jin. You passed the test. All of you passed. But you, Jin, you led them. You showed them how to see the world not as it is, but as it can be. Jin stood up, still catching his breath. He looked back at the forest. He looked at the simple branch spear he was still holding. He had come to the academy to learn about the future, but he had found his greatest strength in the past, in the simple, timeless knowledge of how to use what you have. He knew then that he was not just a cadet. He was a reminder that sometimes the most advanced weapon in the universe is a sharpened stick, and the most powerful tool is a mind that knows how to use it.